not quite as
Part. He keeps on working. Wait till system.
that's pretty good. Yeah, I was making some adjustments here this week, so hopefully everybody can see the board. All right, well, here we are, number 6, week 6. Took a couple little detours. We got out of the book for a minute and did some history on Bill W. and Abby and how they met, and then last week we talked about Bill W. and carrying the message to Dr. Bob in Akron, and so tonight we're going to work on the second chapter, which is what I like to think of as the first promise in the big book. There is a solution. And the book isn't laid out in a fashion where it says, okay, for step 1, you do this. And then for step 2, you do this. In fact, the first place that the book makes reference to what you would do for step 1 is in the chapter to the agnostic. In the beginning, it says that we learned that we had to concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholic. It says this is the first step in recovery. That's the first place that it makes a mention of. So the book isn't laid out in a fashion where it says do X, Y, and Z to complete step 1. The first 2 steps are proposals. They're ideas. And in the first step, it contains two different ideas. The first of which is that it says we were powerless over alcohol. Powerless means, for me, means that every time I drink, I get drunk. Okay? That's what power, I mean, in essence, that's what powerless means. It doesn't mean that I can't drink. It means that I can't drink in safety, right? And then the second half of the first step, we had a meeting on this the other night. David had a really great topic last night. If you weren't there, you missed a great one. Great preparation where he talked about the unmanageability. It says in our lives it become unmanageable. And so a lot of people seem to think that once they stop drinking that their life will be manageable again. And that's probably true to some degree. I mean, I stopped ending up in jail. I stopped going in front of the judges as often, you know. I stopped, screwing the bill collectors or the people that I owed money to as much, that was a progressive thing. Recovery's progressive. But at any rate, my life didn't get manageable just because I stopped drinking, okay? So our lives had become unmanageable. So these are there are 2 ideas in the first step, right? They're just ideas. There's nothing to work. There's nothing it doesn't say write out. It doesn't say list. It doesn't say go to. It says they're just ideas. So the first part of the book, after Bill's story, is this second chapter, which is there is a solution, and the third chapter, which is more about alcoholism. And in these 2 chapters, I believe the book seeks to do is give you an understanding of what alcoholism is, what an alcoholic is, what powerlessness is, what the insanity of the first drink is, what unmanageability is, and it talks more about that in the 5th chapter about the unmanageability. And so those chapters and the chapter to the agnostic seek to give us an understanding mostly about the mental and spiritual problems related to alcoholism so that you have a full understanding of what your condition is, okay? So let's start out on page 17 with there's a solution. Everybody there? Chapter 2. We of Alcoholics Anonymous know thousands of men and women who were once just as hopeless as Bill. Nearly all have what? Recovered. There's that word again. Recovered. All right. They have solved the drink problem. We are average Americans. All sections of this country and many of its occupations are represented, as well as many political, economic, social, and religious backgrounds. we are people who normally would not mix. Is that true or what?
Yeah.
Huh? Yeah,
Right.
yeah. Do you ever sit in a meeting and look at somebody and think, man, I wouldn't drink with him? All right. But it says, we are people normally would not mix, but there exists among us a fellowship, a friendliness, and an understanding, which is indescribably wonderful. That's true. I mean, anywhere you go in the country, any meeting you go to, anywhere in the country, probably anywhere in the world. In fact, who is it talks about this? Rex talks about going to Mexico and being in meetings with people that are speaking Spanish, and he doesn't speak any Spanish, but there was still that camaraderie there, that fellowship. It says, we are like passengers of a great liner the moment after rescue from shipwreck, when camaraderie, joyousness, and democracy pervade the vessel from steerage to captain's table. Unlike the feelings of the ship's passengers, however, our joy and escape from disaster does not subside as we go our individual ways. The feeling of having shared in a common peril is one element in the powerful cement which binds us. But that in itself would never have held us together as we are now joined. The tremendous fact, and for every one of us, is that we have discovered a common solution. We have a way out on which we can absolutely agree, and upon which we can join in brotherly and harmonious action. Isn't it interesting that he chose the word action, that he didn't say brotherly and harmonious love? He said brotherly and harmonious action. That's what's required for recovery. This is the great news this book carries to those who suffer from alcoholism. An illness of this sort, and we have come to believe it, an illness involves those about us in a way no other human sickness can. If a person has cancer, all are sorry for him, and no one is angry or hurt. But not so with the alcoholic illness, for with it there goes annihilation of all things worthwhile in life, and engulfs all whose lives touch the sufferers. It brings misunderstanding, fierce resentment, financial insecurity, disgusted friends and employers, warped lives of blameless children, sad wives and parents. Anyone can increase the list. We hope that this volume will inform and comfort those who are or who may be affected. There are many. Highly competent psychiatrists who have dealt with us have found it sometimes impossible to persuade an alcoholic to discuss his situation without reserve. Strangely enough, wives, parents, and intimate friends usually find us even more unapproachable than do the psychiatrist and the doctor. But the ex-problem drinker, and these words are in italics, right? That means this is important. But the ex-problem drinker who has found this solution, who is properly armed, that's important, properly armed, with facts about himself, can generally win over the entire confidence of another alcoholic in a few hours. Until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished. Isn't that what Dr. Bob intimated in what we were reading last week? Was that he had a lot of support. He had a lot of help through the Oxford group for his alcoholism, but something magical happened when Bill Wilson approached him, who had the same problem, right? And had talked his language, right? He understood him like nobody else did, right? That's the most valuable piece, I think, that I have as a recovering alcoholic or recovered alcoholic in working with others, is that I know what a guy's feeling most of the time, or what his circumstances are. I know how hopeless he might feel, and I know not to sugarcoat that. I know not to say, hey, don't feel hopeless. It's like that's just how you feel in the beginning. All right. The man who is making the approach has had the same difficulty, that he obviously knows what he is talking about, that his whole deportment shouts at the new prospect that he is a man with a real answer, that he has no attitude of holier than thou, nothing whatever, except the sincere desire to be helpful, there are no fees to pay, no axes to grind, no people to please, no lectures to be endured. These are the conditions we have found most effective. After such an approach, many take up their beds and walk again. None of us makes a sole vocation of this work, nor do we think its effectiveness would be increased if we did. We feel that elimination, so isn't that what it says in the beginning of the book? It says that our alcoholic work isn't that what it said in the foreword, I think? Or it's in the foreword or the preface. It says our alcoholic work is an avocation. It means it's something I do over and above what I do for a vocation. It's not what I do for a living, right? And the book says that we don't think its effectiveness would be increased if we did. We feel that elimination of our drinking is but a beginning. So just stopping drinking probably isn't enough, right? I mean, I stopped a lot of times. Every time the judge threw me in the county clink, I stopped, right? But eventually, always, the day and the time would come when I'd get the, I don't know any other way to put it. I get the fuckets, you know.
Yeah.
Screw it. I'm just gonna have a drink. I know what I did last time. I know I went off the deep end. This time I'm gonna be careful, you know. But yeah, it'll be different this time. Yeah, and that's because of the insane thought, right? That switch up here that doesn't work in me. Okay, elimination of our drinking is but a beginning. A much more important demonstration of our principles. Doesn't say steps, right? It says demonstration of our principles lies before us in our respective homes, occupations, and affairs. All of us spend much of our spare time in the sort of effort which we are going to describe. Isn't that interesting? There's another interesting statement. All of us, not a few of us, all of us spend much of our spare time in the sort of effort which we are going to describe. A few are fortunate enough to be so situated that they can give nearly all of their time to the work. If we keep on the way we are going, there is little doubt that much good will result, but the surface of the problem would hardly be scratched. Those of us who live in large cities are overcome by the reflection that close by hundreds are dropping into oblivion every day. Many could recover if they had the opportunity we have enjoyed. How then shall we present that which has been so freely given us? Okay, here's what the book is saying. So it says, we have concluded to publish an anonymous volume setting forth the problem as we see it. So there are three places that I'm aware of that the book talks about what it's about, right? So in the very beginning, in the foreword, it says that we of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. That's the first place that the book tells you what its purpose is. Okay? Then there's this statement, which is we have concluded to publish an anonymous volume setting forth the problem as we see it. So that's two places where the book describes itself. And there's one more, you don't have to turn to it, but I'll read it to you. It's in the chapter to the agnostic, and it is like on page 45. It says, lack of power. We had to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves, obviously, but where and how were we to find this power? Well, that's exactly what this book is about. So there are three places that I'm aware of that the book makes the statements about what its purpose is and what it's about. Okay? To publish an honest public. We shall bring to task our combined experience and knowledge. This should suggest a useful program for anyone concerned with a drinking problem. Of necessity, there will be discussions of matters medical, psychiatric, social, and religious. We are aware that these matters are from their very nature controversial. Nothing would please us so much as to write a book which would contain no basis for contention or argument. We shall do our utmost to achieve this idea. I think he did pretty good. Most of us sense that real tolerance of other people's shortcomings and viewpoints and a respect for their opinions are attitudes which make us more useful to others. Our very lives as ex-problem drinkers depend upon our constant thought of others and how we may help meet their needs. You may have already asked yourself, why is it that all of us became so very ill from drinking? Doubtless, you are curious to discover how and why, in the face of expert opinion to the contrary, we have recovered from a hopeless condition of mind and body. Makes that statement again. So if it's saying it twice in the same book, I would say that that's pertinent. What do I have to do? He says, if you are an alcoholic who wants to get over it, you may be already asking, what do I have to do? Here again, well, I'm wrong, so here's four. Here's 4 times it mentions purpose. It is the purpose of this book to answer such questions specifically. We shall tell you what we have done. Before going into a detailed discussion, it may be well to summarize some points as we see them. So it's telling you the next few paragraphs, I would imagine, are going to be, what it's saying is summarize some points as we see them. Okay? How many times have people said to us, I can take it or leave it alone? Why can't he? Why don't you drink like a gentleman or quit? That fella can't handle his liquor. Why don't you try beer and wine? Lay off the hard stuff. His willpower must be weak. He could stop if he wanted to. She's such a sweet girl, I should think he'd stop for her sake. The doctor told him that if he ever drank again, it'd kill him. But there he is, all lit up again. Now these are commonplace observations on drunk drinkers, which we hear all the time. Back of them is a world of ignorance and misunderstanding. We see that these expressions refer to people whose reactions are very different from ours, right? Okay, type 1. Okay, there's 3 types of drinkers it's going to talk about in this next summary. Type 1. Moderate drinkers have little trouble in giving up liquor entirely if they have good reason for it. They can take it or leave it alone. Anybody here in that category? Nobody here. Okay. Type 2. Then we have a certain type of hard drinker. He may have had the habit badly enough to gradually impair him physically and mentally. It may cause him to die a few years before his time. If a significantly strong reason, ill health, falling in love, change of environment, or the warnings of a doctor become operative, this man can also stop or moderate. Although he may find it difficult and troublesome and may even need medical attention. So, type 3. But what about the real alcoholic? And that's where you hear people from time to time, you'll hear a fellow refer to himself as I'm so-and-so and I'm a real alcoholic. Well, that's where that saying comes from, is from this paragraph or this sentence. What about the real alcoholic? He may start off as a moderate drinker. He may or may not become a continuous hard drinker. But at some stage of his drinking career, he begins to lose all control of his liquor consumption once he starts to drink. Okay? Here's the fellow who's been puzzling you, especially in his lack of control. He does absurd, incredible, tragic things while drinking. He's a real Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. He is seldom mildly intoxicated. He is always more or less insanely drunk. His disposition while drinking resembles his normal nature but little. He may be one of the finest fellows in the world, yet let him drink for a day. And he frequently becomes disgustingly, even dangerously antisocial. He has a positive genius for getting tight at exactly the wrong moment, particularly when some important decision must be made or engagement kept. I can see that in my life. It was like, if there was a holiday coming around, you could count on one thing. I wasn't going to be there, because I was going to be laid out somewhere drunk. I was going to be holed up in the crack house somewhere. I was probably not going to be at the Thanksgiving dinner table. Okay, and that's the way. But I mean, I really identify with this. It says that getting tight at exactly the wrong moment, or maybe I get a job interview or something, and instead of being able to show up there, I'm I'm laid out because I'm hungover, or I'm in the crack house and I can't leave. That was my experience. Or engagement kept. He is often perfectly sensible and well balanced concerning everything except liquor. Well, I can't really claim that either, but in that respect, he is incredibly dishonest and selfish. Here's this next couple of sentences is really important to me, and I identify with this on a very deep level. He says, he often possesses special abilities, skills, and aptitudes, and has a promising career ahead of him. He uses his gifts to build up a bright outlook for himself and his family and himself, and then he pulls the structure down on his head by a senseless series of sprees. That little couple of sentences, or that last sentence, described the last 12 years of my drinking and using, because I went in and out and in and out and in and out of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'd get sober for a little while, and maybe I get the judge off my back, get a good job, maybe I get a little vehicle and start doing pretty good, and bam, I'd drink again and I'd lose it all, and I did that with a family and without a family, but I really identify with that. Pulls the structure down on his head by a senseless series of sprees, and it wasn't because life wasn't going okay for me. That wasn't the cause, He is the fellow who goes to bed so intoxicated he ought to sleep the clock around. Yet early next morning, he searches madly for the bottle he misplaced the night before. If he can afford it, he may have liquor concealed all over the house to be certain no one gets its entire supply away from him to throw down the waste pipe. As matters grow worse, he begins to use a combination of high-powered sedative and liquor to quiet his nerves so he can go to work. So who thinks that there's no mention of drugs in Alcoholics Anonymous or the book of Alcoholics Anonymous? Yep, there it is. Then comes the day when he simply cannot, because, I say that because, I was a crack addict as well as being alcoholic. My primary drug of choice is probably alcohol, but I used cocaine to manage alcohol and alcohol to manage cocaine, Says, then comes the day when he simply cannot make it and he gets drunk all over again. Perhaps he goes to a doctor who gives him morphine or some sedative with which to taper off. Then he begins to appear at hospitals and sanitariums. Okay, so today you wouldn't appear at hospitals and sanitariums. Where would you appear? Huh? Rehab. Treatment. Detox, right? Okay. So I just want you to see how there are some things that have changed, but you see how this still applies, right? It's still relevant. It's still relative. It's relative. It's still relevant. This is by no means a comprehensive picture of the true alcoholic. As RB, I never heard anybody use that word. I'm a true alcoholic, but maybe I'll pick that one up. I'm Wes, and I'm a true alcoholic. As our behavior patterns vary, this description should identify him roughly. Why does he behave like this? If hundreds of experiences have shown him that one drunk means another debacle with all its attendant suffering and humiliation, why is it he takes that one drink? Why can't he stay on the water wagon? What has become of the common sense and willpower that he still sometimes displays with respect to other matters? Perhaps there never will be a full answer to these questions. Opinions vary considerably as to why the alcoholic reacts differently from normal people. We are not sure why. Once a certain point is reached, little can be done for him. We cannot answer the riddle. We know that while the alcoholic keeps away from drink, as he may do for months or years, he reacts much like other men. We are equally positive that once he takes any alcohol, whatever, into his system, something happens both in the bodily and mental sense, okay, which makes it virtually impossible for him to stop. The experience of any alcoholic will abundantly confirm this. These observations would be academic and pointless if our friend never took the first drink, thereby setting the terrible cycle in motion. Therefore, the main problem of the alcoholic centers in his mind rather than in his body. Do you guys understand? Do you understand how powerful and how important that sentence is? Okay? Because here's the real deal. Is you could get up and walk out of here and go leave sober living today and go on and live the rest of your life and never take another drink. And if you never drank again, you would never set up that physical compulsion. Right? So you could just go. Just never drink again. So if that's the truth, why was it that I was unable to do that? Because it wasn't that I didn't know that drinking meant death, humiliation, despair, poverty. I knew that. But again and again and again and again, I'd return to this place where in my mind, somehow I would allow that to occur. I would say that it's going to be different this time, or, well, I know it was bad last time, but this time I won't let it get as bad as I did last time, right? Yeah. Laugh. So the main problem of the alcoholic centers in his mind rather than in his body, because I couldn't keep that thought that it's the same thing. The book makes this analogy later, and probably on the next page, about the common sense that keeps one from placing their hand on a hot burner, right? I know that it's going to burn, So why do I do it again? If you ask him why he started on that last bender, the chances are he will offer you any one of 100 alibis. Sometimes these excuses have a certain plausibility, but none of them really make sense in the light of the havoc an alcoholic's drinking bout creates. They sound like the philosophy of a man who, having a headache, beats himself on the head with a hammer so that he can't feel the ache. If you draw this fallacious reasoning to the attention of an alcoholic, he will laugh it off or become irritated and refuse to talk. That just paints a great picture of me. Once in a while, he may tell the truth. And the truth, strange to say, is usually that he has no more idea why he took that first drink than you have. Some drinkers have excuses with which they are satisfied part of the time, but in their hearts, they really do not know why they do it. Once this malady is a disease, right? Once this malady has a real hold, they are a baffled lot. There is the obsession that somehow, someday, they will beat the game, but they often suspect that they're down for the count. How true it is, few realize. In a vague way, their families and friends sense that these drinkers are abnormal, but everybody hopefully awaits the day when the sufferer will rouse himself from his lethargy and assert his power of will. My first sponsor always said, try willpower on diarrhea, see what you come up with. The tragic truth is that if the man be a real alcoholic, there's that word again, the happy day may not arrive. He has lost control. At a certain point in the drinking of every alcoholic, he passes into a state where the most powerful desire to stop drinking is of absolutely no avail. That's scary, isn't it? This tragic situation has already arrived in practically every case long before it's suspected. So by the time, we usually figure it out, we're already, screwed. We're already screwed. The fact is that, here we go. Here again, in italics again, very important, this paragraph. The fact is that most alcoholics, for reasons yet obscure, have lost the power of choice and drink. We don't know why. We still don't know why. This book was written in 1939. We still don't know why. Isn't that amazing? Everything about this is still absolutely 100% true.
I think that statement right there is the first half of step one.
It is. So what, and I think you are well to pay attention to that while we're reading through. All of the ideas that it's bringing to you and bringing to light are to do with the first two steps. Okay? All of the next two chapters have to do with the first two steps. The fact is that most alcoholics, for reasons yet obscure, have lost the power of choice in drink. Our so-called willpower becomes practically non-existent. We are unable at certain times, this is the explanation of insanity right here. We are unable at certain times to bring into consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. We are without defense against the first drink. Do you understand? That is the definition of insanity relative to alcoholism. Now you go to a meeting and people will start talking about, they'll bring up the topic of insanity, and somebody will start talking about their choices for a mate and what a horrible choice that they made in the last person that they married and how they're insane. That has nothing to do with alcoholism. Okay? Lots of people make bad choices in relationships, okay? There are lots of bad choices that we can make. Relative to alcoholism and the insanity of the disease of alcoholism, it's about this. We're unable at certain times to bring into consciousness, to remember, with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. We are without defense against the first drink. That's the insanity. The most certain consequences that follow taking even a glass of beer do not crowd into the mind to deter us. If these thoughts occur, they are hazy and readily supplanted with an old threadbare idea that this time we shall handle ourselves like other people. There is a complete failure of the kind of defense that keeps one from putting his hand on a hot stove. If we go down into the kitchen and I turn the burners on and it turns glowing red, and I take you and I say, touch that burner, put the palm of your hand on that burner, what are you going to say? Hell no. Not only no, hell no. Why? Why? Why?
Because it burns.
Because it burns. How do you know that?
Because I've done it before.
Because you've done it before. So you have a memory of that, right?
Yeah.
Right? So I get locked up in Ripley County, Indiana, in Versailles, right, for DUI. It's, I don't know, number 3, number 4, I don't know what number it was, but at any rate, I do 30 days. I remember every day on my knees, every morning in that jail cell, on my knees, praying to God that when I got out of there, that God would help me. And I kept promising God, I promise when I get out of here, I'm going to do the right thing. I am done with this. I'm done with this stuff. I'm not doing it no more, man. No more drinking for me. I swear on my mama's grave, I am not drinking again. I walked out of that courthouse across the courtyard to the bar after 30 days of saying and doing that, right? The complete failure of the kind of defense that keeps one from putting his hand on a hot stove. I knew exactly what was going to happen, and I did it anyways. The alcoholic may say to himself in the most casual way, it won't burn me this time, so here's how. I love that. Isn't that comical? It won't burn me this time, so here's how. Or perhaps he doesn't think at all. And I think that's what happened when I walked out of that jail cell that day. It was like, I wasn't thinking. How often have some of us begun to drink in this nonchalant way and after the third or fourth pounded on the bar and said to ourselves, for God's sakes, how did I ever get started again? Only to have that thought supplanted by well, I'll stop with the 6th drink. Or, what's the use anyhow? You know, that was usually what I came to. What's the use anyhow? When this sort of thinking is fully established in an individual with alcoholic tendencies, he has probably placed himself beyond human aid. and unless locked up, may die or go permanently insane. Sounds pretty hopeless, don't it? So I think that there again, I think it's very, very important that you understand and really grasp how hopeless this condition is. Okay? Most people will die from this. These stark and ugly facts have been confirmed by legions of alcoholics throughout history. But for the grace of God, there would have been thousands more convincing demonstrations. So we want to stop, but cannot. There is a solution. Maybe some hope. Almost none of us like the self-searching, the leveling of our pride, the confession of shortcomings, which the process requires for its successful consummation. But we saw that it really worked in others, and we had come to believe in the hopelessness and futility of life as we had been living it. When, therefore, we were approached by those in whom the problem had been solved, there was nothing left for us but to pick up the simple kit of spiritual tools laid at our feet. We have found much of heaven, and we have been rocketed into a fourth dimension of existence of which we had not even dreamed. You know, if you were to walk up to a hospital up here right now to let's call it a terminal ward or ICU where somebody was dying from cancer, and you walked up to this cancer patient and you said, I've got 12 steps that you can take to walk out of here a free person. What do you think? Would you be willing to do it? What do you think they'd say?
Hell yeah.
Look what's been laid at our feet. The great fact is just this and nothing less. That we have had deep and effective spiritual experiences which have revolutionized our whole attitude toward life, toward our fellows, and towards God's universe. The central fact of our lives today is the absolute certainty that our Creator has entered into our hearts and lives in a way which is indeed miraculous. He has commenced to accomplish those things for us which we could never do by ourselves. So I use this statement kind of in a different manner often. And the way that it was explained to me about the spiritual awakening, my spiritual condition, what I can use to determine where my spiritual condition is that I look at how I feel about me, you, God, and life. And for me, that comes from this statement right here. Because it says we've had deep and effective spiritual experiences which have revolutionized our whole attitude towards how I think about a thing determines how I feel about a thing. You understand? Okay? So my attitude towards my fellows, my life, and towards God's universe. So if I want to know what my spiritual condition is, all I need to do is look at how I'm feeling about me, you, God, and life. If I'm upset at, irritated with, angry at, fearful about any of those relationships or my attitudes towards any of those in my life, my spiritual condition's compromised. Okay? And so what's it say later on in the book? It says that what we actually have is a daily reprieve contingent upon the maintenance of our spiritual condition. So my spiritual condition isn't something that's really elusive out here in the stars somewhere that I can't quite grab a hold of. That's not my spiritual condition. Do you understand? And it doesn't even have anything to do with church necessarily. It doesn't mean that church can't foster the condition that I want, okay? But it's not my spiritual condition. My spiritual condition is simply how I feel about me, you, God, and life. Does that make sense? Okay. We'll come back to that because we're going to read the spiritual appendix too here in a little bit. Actually, we just came through that, past that asterisk. So let's go back there now. Let's do that, okay? So we're on page 25. We're going to go to the back of the book, to the spiritual appendix, spiritual experience. Anybody know what that is? I've got a third edition, so mine's
67.
567, okay? Mine's 569, but I got an earlier edition. All right, everybody there? Everybody there? All right, spiritual experience. So, the terms spiritual experience and spiritual awakening are used many times in this book, which, upon careful reading, shows that the personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism has manifested itself among us in many different forms. So personality change. So let's talk about that. So what could be a part of a personality change? Think about that.
Being selfless.
Being selfless. Okay, so I was very selfish. Now I attempt to be more selfless.
Honesty.
What else could be a personality change?
Honesty.
Okay, so let's look at the contrast. So bring me contrast. So dishonesty and honesty, right? Okay, so I was very dishonest. Today I'm working on employing the what? The principle of honesty, or the principle of selflessness, right? So these are principles. So what's it say about the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous? In the 12th step, what's it say? Having had a spiritual awakening, as the result of these steps, we what?
Carry the message to the still.
We tried to
Carry this message to alcoholics
and practice these principles in all. It doesn't say practice these steps in all our affairs, does it?
No.
It says practice these principles in all our affairs. So through employing new principles in our life, we have manifested this, we begin to manifest this personality change. So I'm going to jump back. You don't have to. I'm going to jump back. Let's jump back. Let's go to 27. Actually, we're going ahead 2 pages. So let's jump back to 27. Because I want to tie all this together, because the book says in a lot of different ways the same thing. And if you put it all together, I think it gives you a deeper understanding of what it's trying to convey to you. So on page 27, middle of the page, he says, and we're going to read this again here in a minute, but he says, yes, doctor, there is exceptions to cases such as yours have been occurring since early times here and there. Once in a while, alcoholics have had what are called vital spiritual experiences. To me, these occurrences are phenomena. Remember, we said what a phenomena is. We can see it, we can measure it, we know we have some visual evidence of something that's occurred, but we don't know exactly why. We just know that it has, right? Phenomena. It says, they appear to be in the nature of huge emotional displacements and rearrangements. Really important, right? Huge emotional displacements and rearrangements. Yet, when I was in high school, I remember every now and then one of my friends, somebody would get religion, kind of like Evie did, right? Or like Evie Thatcher did, right? And they'd come back to school and they had a born again experience in a church, and it was a very, very real experience for them. It was powerful. It was life changing, and they came back a different person. They stopped smoking cigarettes with us out on the wall. They stopped going to party with us. They stopped running around with the bad influences. They started doing the right thing, right? So it was a powerful emotional displacement and rearrangement. Something very powerful happened inside of them. Okay? Ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men and women, it should have said, are suddenly cast to one side and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them. So let's go back to spiritual experience, back in the very end of the book. Remember that. It said sudden, has had a sudden experience. So the next paragraph in spiritual experience says, yet it is true that our first printing gave many readers the impression that these personality changes or religious experiences must be in the nature of sudden and spectacular upheavals. Happily for everyone, this conclusion is erroneous. You see why it's made that statement now? Why the book made that statement or prefaced that in the spiritual experience? Because it's saying that some of us don't have this sudden come to Jesus moment or whatever. For most of it's going to go on, it's going to tell us. I'll go on. It says, in the first few chapters, a number of sudden revolutionary changes are described. Did I already read that? No? Okay. Though it was not our intention to create such an impression, many alcoholics have nevertheless concluded that in order to recover, they must acquire an immediate and overwhelming God consciousness, followed at once by a vast change in feeling and outlook. Okay? That's the evidence of the spiritual awakening. Do you see it? Is the vast change of feeling and outlook. What was my attitude and outlook? What's the promise to say? Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change, right? When I got here, my attitude and my outlook was same shit, different day. Life's a bitch and then you die, right? Nice guys finish last. You know, that was my attitude. That was the thinking that dominated my life. I don't believe that anymore. I don't believe that life's a bitch and then you die. I don't believe that it's the same shit, different day. It's not that. My experience in my recovery in my life today isn't like that at all. Right? So, the spiritual awakening, the spiritual restoration can be summarized in this vast change of feeling and outlook. See? It's that simple. It's not something that you just can't quite grab a hold of because it's too far out of this realm. That's not true. Okay? Now, I will say that a big part of what has helped to foster that change for me is trust and reliance upon a power greater than myself. Okay? So, let's go on and read some more. Among our rapidly growing membership of thousands of alcoholics, such transformations, though frequent, are by no means the rule. Most of our experiences are what the psychologist William James calls the educational variety because it develops slowly over a period of time. Quite often, friends of the newcomer are aware of the difference long before he is himself. He finally realizes that he has undergone a profound alteration in his reaction to life. There again, I'm going to read that again. He finally realizes that he has undergone a profound alteration in his reaction to life. That such a change could hardly have been brought about by himself alone. What often takes place in a few months could seldom have been accomplished by years of self-discipline. With few exceptions, our members find that they have tapped an unsuspected inner resource which they presently identify with their own conception of a power greater than themselves. So there's a connection to a higher power and that dependence upon it, but it isn't the spiritual awakening. Does that make sense? So I think what's so awesome about this is that it doesn't keep anybody outside the circle. Do you see? You don't have to believe in anything in particular. Isn't that the beauty of it? Just a power greater than yourself. You call it what you darn well want. Call it anything you want. I think that it's vital to develop a trust and reliance upon this higher power, to get that new attitude and outlook, that sense of ease and comfort that I was trying to get by taking a few drinks, right? I get that today from this relationship with a higher power that I let fight my battles for me today, fellas. I let it fight my battles. I don't have to fight anymore. Doesn't mean I ain't got any work. I got a lot of work to do. All right. Most emphatically, we wish to say any alcoholic capable of honestly facing his problems in the light of our experience can recover, provided he does not close his mind to spiritual concepts. He can only be defeated by an attitude of intolerance or belligerent denial. We find that no one need have difficulty with the spirituality of the program. Willingness, honesty, and open-mindedness are the essentials of recovery, but these are indispensable. There's principle which is bar against all information, which proof against all arguments, and which cannot fail to keep man in everlasting ignorance. That principle is contempt prior to investigation. Okay. Questions? Time we got?
50.
10 minutes? All right, good enough. All right, let's go back to page 25. Do you see how much energy, how much writing the book, how much it's trying to do to help you understand the spiritual malady and the spiritual experience? It's got a tremendous amount of information, and we're just getting started. See how much emphasis there is upon this? Okay, so I'm going to go back and I'll read that paragraph again because it's so important to me. The great fact is just this and nothing less, that we have had deep, effective spiritual experiences which have revolutionized our whole attitude towards life, toward our fellows, and towards God's universe. And you know, that experience, this spiritual experience, it may be taking place for you now. It may have taken place for you. It may take place for you for the rest of your life. But I mean, it's an awakening, okay? The central fact of our lives today is the absolute certainty that our Creator has entered into our lives and hearts in a way which is indeed miraculous. He has commenced to accomplish those things for us which we could never do by ourselves. If you are as seriously alcoholic as we were, we believe there's no middle of the road solution. We were in a position where life was becoming impossible. And if we had passed into the region from which there is no return through human aid, we had but two alternatives. One was to go on to the bitter end, blotting out the consciousness of our intolerable situation as best we could. The other was to accept spiritual help. This we did because we honestly wanted to and were willing to make the effort. A certain American businessman is talking about Roland. Now, remember we have talked a little bit about Roland relative to Evie Thatcher, right? Roland is one of the guys that interceded on Evie's behalf. Okay, well, this is talking about Roland. A certain American businessman had ability, good sense, and high character. For years, he had floundered from one sanitarium to another. See, in that day, you didn't go to detox, you didn't go to treatment. You went to sanitariums, okay? He had consulted the best-known American psychiatrist. Then he had gone to Europe, placing himself in the care of the celebrated physician, the psychiatrist Dr. Young, who prescribed for him. Though experience had made him skeptical, he finished his treatment with unusual confidence. His physical and mental condition were usually good. Above all, he believed that he had acquired such a profound knowledge of the inner workings of his mind and its hidden springs that relapse was unthinkable. Nonetheless, he was drunk in short time. More baffling still, he could not give himself he could give himself no satisfactory explanation for his fall. So he returned to this doctor whom he had admired, and he asked him point blank why he could not recover. He wished above all things to regain his self-control. He seemed quite rational and well-balanced with respect to other problems, yet he had no control whatever over alcohol. Why was this? He begged the doctor to tell him the whole truth, and he got it. In the doctor's judgment, he was utterly hopeless. He could never regain his position in society, and he would have to place himself under lock and key or hire a bodyguard if he expected to live long. This was the great physician's opinion. But this man still lives and is a free man. He does not need a bodyguard, nor is he confined. He can go anywhere on this earth where other men may go without disaster, provided he remains willing to maintain a certain simple attitude. I wonder what Bill was saying when he wrote that. Maintain a certain simple attitude. What do you think that attitude might be? Humility? Gratitude? I think those are great answers. I'd say humility, gratitude, willingness,
Maybe he's talking about
open-mindedness, perseverance,
the hopelessness, maybe.
or the knowledge of the hopelessness,
Yeah.
the remembrance of remembering how bad it was,
Being surrendered.
being surrendered. Okay. Yeah, interesting, because, this is Roland, that we talked about last week or 2 weeks ago, and Roland never became a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Roland came back, my understanding was he came back to New York and engaged with the Oxford group, and that's what he built his sobriety upon. Okay, but Roland never became a member of Alcoholics Anonymous after AA, shot off from the Oxford group. But he is the guy, or one of the guys that prescribed to Abby Thatcher about here's what you need to do, right? And 2 other Oxford group members. So maintain a certain simple attitude. I think surrender might be the one, because I don't believe that he was a religious man or affiliated with any type of a spiritual group, other than he went back and got with the Oxford group, which was the key to the lock for him, I believe. So, all right, let's go on. What time is it? 6? All right.
57.
We'll finish this page, and then, we're not going to make it through 2 more pages, so we'll finish this page. Some of our alcoholic readers may think they can do without spiritual help. Let us tell you the rest of the conversation our friend had with his doctor. The doctor said, "You have the mind of a chronic alcoholic. I have never seen one single case recover where that state of mind," there's that word again, remember in the beginning it says state of mind and body, state of mind existed to the extent that it does in you. Our friend felt as though the gates of hell had closed on him with a clang. He said to the doctor, "Is there no exception?" "Yes," replied the doctor, "there is. Exceptions to cases such as yours have been occurring since early times. Here and there, here we go, once in a while, alcoholics have had what are called vital spiritual experiences. To me, these occurrences are phenomenon. They appear to be in the nature of huge emotional displacements and rearrangements, ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which were once the guiding force of the lives of these men, are suddenly cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them." And I think that this is really what the steps do. The steps, for me, have changed my ideas, my emotions, and my attitudes, which were the guiding forces. Only difference is mine weren't suddenly cast to one side. That's not been my experience. And that's what the spiritual appendix is trying to tell us, is that not everybody has it that way. For some of us, this develops slowly. He says, in fact, I've been trying to produce such emotional rearrangement within you. With many individuals, the methods which I employed are successful, but I have never been successful with an alcoholic of your description. Upon hearing this, our friend was somewhat relieved, for he reflected that after all, he was a good church member, so I was wrong about that. This hope, however, was destroyed by the doctors telling him that while his religious convictions were very good, in his case, they did not spell the necessary vital spiritual experience. And I think that that's what the difference was with the Oxford group and traditional Christianity. Traditional Christian groups was the Oxford group was centered on spiritual principles and a spiritual life, not so much religious dogma.
So is this doctor? Is that Young?
Yeah, Dr. Young. Yeah, Carl Young. Yep, it was. I'm gonna go on. We only got a page and a half, so let's do this and we'll be done. Here was the terrible dilemma in which our friend found himself, when he had the extraordinary experience, which, as we have already told you, made him a free man. We in turn sought the same escape with all the desperation of drowning men. That's desperate, right? Desperation of drowning men. That means that you might have to put some effort into this. What seemed like a flimsy reed has proved to be the loving and powerful hand of God. A new life has been given us, or if you prefer, a design for living that really works. The distinguished American psychologist William James, in his book, Varieties of Religious Experience, indicates a multitude of ways in which men have discovered God. We have no desire to convince anyone that there is only one way by which faith can be acquired. If what we have learned and felt and seen means anything at all, it means that all of us, whatever our race, creed, or color, are the children of a living Creator with whom we may form a relationship upon simple and understandable terms as soon as we are willing and honest enough to try. Those having religious affiliations will find here nothing disturbing to their beliefs or ceremonies. There is no friction among us over such matters. We think it no concern of ours what religious bodies our members identify themselves with as individuals. This should be an entirely personal affair, which each one decides for himself in the light of past associations or his present decision or present choice. Not all of us join religious bodies, but most of us favor such memberships. In the following chapters, there appears an explanation of alcoholism, so it's telling you more about what it's going to talk about, right? As we understand it. Then a chapter addressed to the agnostic. Many who once were in this class are now among our fellowship. Surprisingly enough, we find such convictions no great obstacle to a spiritual experience. Remember, we talked about this earlier, that the spiritual experience isn't necessarily the relationship with a higher power, right? A spiritual experience isn't necessarily a relationship with a higher power. That can be a fundamental part of that spiritual transformation, right? But it's not the necessity. Does that make sense? The necessity is that ideas, emotions, and attitudes have to change, right? Ideas, attitudes, and emotions have to change in order for that psychic change to occur on the inside, ever related to the mind and soul. Right?
Bill was at the church and he was moved.
Speak up.
Like when like I spoke earlier in the book, when Bill was at the church.
Well,
in the war.
that was a spiritual experience, but that was
It didn't come until later on that anything may have come about it.
Well, no. What I'm talking about is that ideas, attitudes, and emotions that change in us as a result of working the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous are evidence of the spiritual transformation, right? That's what I'm trying to say. Further on, clear-cut directions are given showing how we have recovered. These are followed by 43 personal experiences. Each individual in the personal personal stories describes in his own language and from his own point of view the way he established his relationship with God. These give a fair cross-section of our membership and a clear-cut idea of what has actually happened in their lives. We hope that no one will consider these self-revealing accounts in bad taste. Our hope is that many alcoholic men and women desperately in need will see these pages, and we believe that it is only by fully disclosing ourselves and our problems that they will be persuaded to say, quote, yes, I am one of them too. I must have this thing, unquote. All right. So what do you gather from that chapter and there's a solution? What was it mostly about?
My powerlessness over alcohol
Powerlessness,
and the
the
insanity.
insanity, and
I think it kind of for me separated how I thought to how like other people who don't have my disease was thinking. It talked about the moderate drinker, the ex-problem drinker, and then it broke down the alcoholic. And I think that for me it kind of just, I know Bill's story, it's easy to relate to that, but I think breaking it down like that was able for me to really relate to like this disease that I got, the insanity part that you guys were just talking about as well.
Kind of laying out what you have to do.
laying out what you have to do.
Yeah, the only thing you have to change is everything. That's
Yeah.
what I kept thinking of the whole time, and it's talking about behaviors and thinking and.
Right. Ideas, attitudes, and emotions. All right. Well, we'll wrap it up for tonight, and next week we'll start on more about alcoholism, and we should be able to get through that next week, and we'll go from there. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.